Hello, I'm Claire Poole and welcome to the Climate of Sport podcast, the show in which you get the inside track on all things sport and sustainability globally. Join me every week where I'll be chatting to a special guest about news, opinion and insights on how sport is moving to a more environmentally friendly future or taking action on climate change. Hi everyone and welcome to this week's episode of the Climate of Sport podcast. It is a pleasure to be back with you and a pleasure to be joined this week by Dr. Brian McCullough, who is Associate Professor of Sport Management and Director of the Laboratory for Sustainability in Sport at Texas A&M University and Co-Director of the Sport Ecology Group. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure and so lovely to chat to you because great timing. We spoke to Tom Gribben at Planet Super League in the last episode from more of a small business startup supporting fan engagement on sport. So as we were talking, I was thinking, I probably did this the wrong way around. We should get Brian to talk about some of the amazing work that's happening from more the academia side and the research side. So we might have done it in a bit of a flip reverse, but people listen to these podcasts in every order. So it's a great opportunity to get you on and talk about your work. So I think for a lot of people who will be listening to this, your reputation precedes you, but just for anyone who isn't aware of you and your work, can you tell us a little bit about you and your background and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm originally from California. We don't need to go back to the start of time here, but originally from California. And so that's where my passion for nature really stems from. And I just did a recent talk for our college where I talked about all these environmental lessons my dad taught me, whether they were intentional or not. Those things got instilled in us of, why environmental protection is important for reforestation projects, or even like reintroducing wolves into Yellowstone and all these lovely things. Yeah. And so then when I got to here at A&M, I thought I wanted to go into the industry, and I respect everyone that makes that choice. I just looked at my life and I said, how can I be as available to my family as possible? And chose the academic route. So maybe those who can't teach, that adage comes true here. But anyway, so I got into that space and started doing research on environment and sport, starting with, behavioral change, looking at recycling behaviors, just because that was the most popular thing. And when I was coming out, I graduated in 2011 with my PhD. And that's, when GSA really started hitting its stride and being very public with things. So it all worked out really well in that space that we started seeing that movement in North America. Yeah. And so then the research has taken on new focus of, I like to think of it as a tiered approach of, one area of research is assessing the environmental impact of a sport organization so that they have a baseline to know what they need to work on. And then the second line of research is that decision-making process, formulating the strategy to address those issues. And then third, once they have that in order, how they start engaging their fans or different stakeholders, which could be sponsors or even attracting new sponsors.
Yeah, nice. So you studied at Texas A&M, then you worked Seattle University.
Yeah, sorry. There you go. Good coaching.
Just, plotting a little timeline here.
There you go. Yeah, sorry. So I graduated from A&M and in 2011. Then I spent 3 years in Ohio at Bowling Green State, and then had the opportunity to go to Seattle University. And at that time, I had to give a shout out to Sheila Nguyen. She gave me good props there, and that was a great professional move for me to go to Seattle. And we launched the certificate program in sustainable leadership, sustainability and sport leadership, and that was really great because I got connected to a lot of fantastic people like yourself during my time at Seattle, and many others, and had some great students. Kristen is one of those shining stars, with GSA. And I have another student, he's the associate general manager for the Reign FC in Seattle as well. So, and, seeing what they're doing in the industry, I never understood this until I actually had children, but like the dad pride that comes with seeing students going in and doing great work, and it's 100% their own, but it's so you get a huge sense of pride seeing their successes in the industry.
Yeah, amazing. A very stellar alumni with Kristen Hanks at Green Sports Alliance, and then with the colleague as well. That's amazing. So in terms of, we were talking about when we first met, which is via Twitter many years ago.
Beauty of social media.
Twitter was a hotbed of community then. Now we're spoiled with social media, but back then it was a small Twitter community. And I think we connected because some of the work you were doing, and I think I was starting to doing some work in this space, and then connecting with the UN Sports for Climate Action framework. And you were obviously involved with that early on as well, in terms of shaping some of the early meetings and the early drafts of the text, etc. So, there's been a lot of cross-pollination of ideas throughout those years, hasn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was trying to find that old Twitter direct message, and I couldn't find it. I was heartbroken. As I was going through my digital footprint, I could see all the pictures, from Bonn, when we were there, but then also, our subsequent meetings, and, having little kids crawling around and whatnot. But But I was telling you before we jumped on this that I thought it was a prank when I got contacted about these things. I was like, I thought, who's pulling my leg here? And fortunately, obviously, it wasn't the case. But that was the second. I credited Sheila for a good professional move, and then I credit you for one being the best networker in this space. I would give you that title amongst many other glowing titles, but that was the next big jump in my professional development. So I appreciate that.
Oh, wow. Well, I wasn't expecting that at all, but that's very kind.
Well, I'll even put it out there publicly. I owe you a couple of drinks.
It's unbelievable. So. You heard it here, guys. You heard it here. The same. I feel like, there's I could attribute that to probably 150 different people as well, in terms of this space. But again, it just highlights a really important point, that I think it is a strong community, and everyone supports everyone and drives each other and presents opportunities and collaborations and etc. And it's a great thing, I think, about this space for anyone who's new to it that's listening, that I think it's really special in that sense. So let's get in a little bit to your work, because I think this is where there's so many great learnings for people who are listening, especially around some of the projects you've done, the research, etc. And obviously you are responsible for a lot of the academic rigor that goes behind so many campaigns and efforts and work from organizations. So it'd be great. I think sustainability with fans in terms of the engagement is an interesting piece, but I know there's other work as well. But can you share a little bit about some of that work? And then also, if we can, sort of try and pull out some insights, some learnings that people can take away from some of that great work that you've done.
Yeah. And sometimes we get, with some of the work that we've done, we get not accused, but that we're trying to steal work from consultants and stuff like that. I want to clarify that that's not our intention. I am a data nerd. I'll throw that out there. I think that's how I established my reputation at GSA. When I would show up, someone would make a claim, and I said, please, what data do you have to support that, right? And that's just my academic perspective and the way that my brain works. And so when we work with these different events, yes, we want to help advance what they're doing. We think that we can lend our expertise of having a little bit more data focus, whether that's creating a campaign or evaluating a campaign. And what we had typically found, and even some of the work that we had initially done, is that we were assessing things post hoc. And that's great, but it was kind of almost reverse engineering. And so then we started to get to the point of creating a model that would be useful to assess a campaign, but also to design it. And so then you can kind of go through that construction, launching, and evaluation, and then tweaking that would come after that. Yeah. And so we were fortunate enough to work with a couple events and lend our expertise. There was the Junior Racing Sailing Championship in Corpus Christi, the Cherry Blossom Run in Washington, D.C., and then the project that was most near and dear to our hearts was the Special Olympics USA Games in Seattle.
Yeah.
And we saw a tremendous amount of success with those. And again, that's a credit to the practitioners that are out there. Carlin Jensen is in particular with the Special Olympics, USA Games when they were in Seattle. And so what we were trying to do there is just baseline and see where the caretakers were in particular of the athletes, Special Olympic athletes. And at that time, we found that 78% were planning to rent a car during their time in Seattle. And as part of that pre-event survey, we're trying to get their values and beliefs and trying to create messages that were going to resonate with them. Mm-hmm. And the games had a limited budget, but it was how do we use that budget appropriately to fulfill the different sustainability targets that we had. And some were social and some were environmentally focused. Mm. And so we helped them launch those campaigns and how to go about doing that based off of our data. And they launched their Walkable Games campaign. And then that resulted in only 7% of people saying they rented a car during their time in Seattle. Yeah. And this is where the researcher in me kicks myself of things I didn't think about, but we didn't add items like, why did you rent a car? Did you rent a car because you were there for vacation afterwards, or you wanted to go to, a national park or something that was in the state and whatnot. But going from 78 to 7 is a pretty successful rate. And again, hats off to the team with the Special Olympics to be able to do that. Yeah. And trusting us to, trust our data. And so that was a really big validation for us. But again, we're trying to refine that model. And so have since expanded that to include sponsors into that, because now we're starting to see that trend of really dedicated sustainability sponsors coming into the space. And that opens the door to more reluctant teams now that they have the financial carrot. And we see that, fans are also responding not only to the pro-environmental behavioral change aspects, but also responding in kind to those sponsors and, buying products and different things like that from them, which kind of seems like a paradox when you're talking about sustainability and selling more product. But anyways, that's a whole nother podcast conversation.
But tell me, not to give away your valuable intellectual property, but in terms of that initial survey of when you found out 78% of people were going to rent cars and then getting it down to 7, what would you say in terms of, if someone's listening to that now and thinking, God, that sounds incredible, and I'm organizing a tournament or a tour or a special event, etc. What would you say top line are sort of the main pillars that went from we know this to we've got it down to there? What are the big sort of chunky elements of making that happen?
I think the biggest thing was that the game organizers were proactive enough to realize that they had to put these campaigns in place before people were planning. So these campaigns were all put in place before the athletes themselves were even, chosen. And so we started surveying people just so we could see, again, that improvement in the influence of the campaign. And so the campaign itself, again, was educating, how do I get here? And it was a unique context because it's kind of a one-off game, right? It doesn't mean the athletes for this game won't compete in the games that are coming up in Orlando, but this was a very unique situation. Everyone's coming here, like on a much larger scale, like a World Cup or an Olympic Games, where you have people that are completely unfamiliar with the city coming. And so that was one of the main elements there. So we expected it to be high just because you don't know. Yeah. And even Seattle, I love the place. I love topography. And now it's all flat as I look out my office window here in Texas. But the public transportation is really kind of the newest, accolade that the area can really promote. And they wanted to do that. But it was just educating people how easy that would be. The other aspects that were really helpful were that the event organizers, your badge that you had either as a caretaker or as an athlete counted as your ticket to go on mass transit during that time. So there was coordination on that part. And then also event planning, all of the facilities except for 2, the natatorium and I think the baseball field were not on the light rail. So then that might explain the 7% as well. But all those things were on public transit, and that was a huge component to that.
Yeah, amazing. And I think people who are maybe, you know, doing Commonwealth Games, or as you said, mega sports events, might be thinking about that intrinsically, but perhaps for people who are doing smaller one-off events, or, you know, that it moves region to region, I think it's really valuable to think about the education, the campaigns, also probably the relationships with transport providers, etc. And the fact that I think that the takeaway of starting that work before even the athletes are picked, because again, naturally, probably with transport, we sort of think about it, oh, well, it's the back end of planning, isn't it? You know, in terms of how people are going to arrive and how they're going to travel around, they'll probably decide that soon before the event. But getting ahead of it as well, I think, is a really interesting insight there.
Yeah, and I mean, there's even events like our work with Cherry Blossom Run. They wanted to encourage the race participants to buy offsets. And then I think they've maybe changed their mentality a little bit of incorporating that into the cost of the race, because they were fortunate enough where they have a lottery to get in there. And so they had the same circumstance where we're not having the same consistent runners every year because we have the lottery. And so, you know, races that are more consistent, people can get into those habits. And so, you know, the campaign itself might raise awareness the first year, but you would still have people along the spectrum of awareness to actually like life-changing behaviors. And so you still need to hit everybody that's along that spectrum to ensure that, again, you're leveraging even the people that are like bought in hook, line, and sinker, that you're kind of leveraging them and encouraging them to tell others about it so that they can pull them along that spectrum to where you would want them to be.
Amazing. So it's great to hear sort of case study from that, but also I'd love to get your insight more broadly about shortly I want to get onto kind of the North American perspective, but around, you had yourself and colleagues brought out the new Routledge handbook recently on sport, the SDGs, etc., you know, which is an incredible piece of work around applying all of the 17 SDGs to sport, and then the academic perspective as well as the industry sort of perspective as well. Your
case study is the best one in there.
I'll take it.
We're going to offend Omar when he hears this.
Yeah, I bet you say that to everyone, so that's fine. It's like, you're my favorite, said to everyone. But in terms of that, what I'd love, you know, if there was outcomes of that or interesting things that you hadn't maybe considered in research, or things that you thought that's quite interesting. Was there anything out of that? It was massive and there's so much in there. I'm still working my way through it myself. But was there any sort of big aha moments or interesting applications of the SDGs that you think are worth sort of noting?
Yeah, I think it's the biggest aha, and I think it was our intention kind of going in, but it was really seeing it when it came to fruition and having the practitioners in, right? So we have 3 chapters or 3 sections for each SDG, introducing it and defining it as it relates to sport, because the SDGs are such a macro level, national level, international level measure. So like boiling it down to an individual organization and how they contribute to this nationally is a tough translation. And so we have the first chapter which defines it, and then how to measure that within sport. And so again, it doesn't translate well down to the individual organization. That's across any industry, but in particular sport. And then the third is the case study, as you mentioned, with practitioners and how their organization has applied that. So we had various sport for development and peace organizations that were in there, which is great to get that perspective, but all the way up to like what the NHL is doing with regards to the SDGs. And so, you know, we always thought like, okay, this organizations can implement the SDGs in and through what they do. So in their organizations internally, but also through the work that they're doing. But to see how that all came together in the midst of COVID, which the project got delayed because of that, but the resilience of our contributors really came through, that you saw how powerful sport really is and on this huge spectrum of sport. And so that was what was the most encouraging thing that came out of that. And I, of course, encourage anyone to go get the book. And my small royalty, I'll buy a cracker or something that comes off of that. So It's not priced sustainably. Sorry, Rutledge, but it's not that way. But that's just the way that it works, I guess. But regardless, it's that's been the biggest thing I've seen about the spectrum of sport and how sport can implement those things, and it's not really often thought of. We see that more in the EU than we do here in North America, and whatnot. So it's kind of changing that paradigm of how people are thinking about their social initiatives, their environmental initiatives, their economic initiatives, and relating them directly back to the SDGs. And that can give you a stronger foundation of like, what the heck should we do? Like, look at these, look what we are doing and how this might align already. And it's not trying to force something to fit, but the fit's already there.
Yeah. Absolutely. No. And there's the ebook, and then you can just take a license for a year as well, which are really, really affordable. And I think it's one of those things that, you could take so much from in terms of that. So definitely worth looking out for. And I thought, there's so much in there as well, as people think about the SDGs and how it relates to especially their strategies, their campaigns, etc. There's so much in there. And as you said, really helpfully, rather than thinking about them just as concepts, being able to see that practitioners put it in practice is really invaluable. So another shout out on that. So tell me, sport positive, the climate of sport, we've got global listeners very, very happily, but it'd be great to hear from you about your perspectives on the North American perspective on where you feel we are in terms of environmental sustainability within sport. So this movement has been increasing in size and pace, obviously, for some people would say decades, others would say certainly in the last 2 to 5 years, we've seen exponential progress. But from the US perspective, the North American perspective, where do you feel like we are right now in terms of progress, but also, challenges and barriers?
Yeah, I think, we start to see people signing up for the Sport for Climate Action Framework, which is always great to see those numbers growing. And now it's kind of where the rubber meets the road. And, now that organizations have made a commitment, and, we can always talk about kind of the stragglers to come into this space. But, when you look at those that are leading within the space, they have the direction, they have this framework, they have the race to zero to help them to know where they should go. Yes. Now it's figuring out, how do we actually get there, right? And I would argue that a lot of the initiatives have started from a marketing perspective, and then now are starting to trickle into operational. Okay. And so we hope to see, chief sustainability officers, right? Matt just recently wrote about that on the sustainability report, about how that's an important role that needs to be expanded within sport. I think North America is a little bit slower than that. That mostly is because of government regulations and the fact that professional teams in North America are really not used to reporting financials, of course, private businesses, but not even reporting hardly anything other than just putting stuff out on their website as not as a marketing ploy, but just that's the way that they've been communicating it. And you're starting to see a little bit more of the rigor in their initiatives. So then there's actually data that's kind of behind that, and they can actually put out reports and show their progress. But that's a big public commitment. But again, in North America, we're not necessarily used to or having our organization, sport organizations in particular, because again, private business, and we can go into a whole bunch of American culture into that. But the challenges there's the lack of reporting. And so we would hope to see that. So you're saying that you do this, please tell us that you are doing this authentically. And there's one team that came out with some initiatives and then more or less said, is this greenwashing? And they said, no, this is not greenwashing. And to me, that puts up a greenwashing flag, but I'm sure they were very authentic in what they were doing.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
I think there's, the reporting stuff, I think, is definitely the same everywhere in the world in terms of, we need more reporting. We need more of that external commitments, but also transparency in terms of that. I think we're starting to go that way now. But even recently, I was astounded, and obviously know a lot of organizations in the US, but even just chatting to people recently, I was astounded sort of how many states at a state level don't have like recycling programs. You spoke about doing recycling and that peak in your interest, 15 years ago, maybe or more. But that as well is fascinating, because I certainly, when I have conversations about, for example, what we're going to put in the agenda at the summit or different things like that, of, some people who've been in this industry for a long time are like, oh, Claire, really? Like, really? We're still talking about LED light bulbs and recycling and stuff? And I'm like, we are a little bit, yeah, because we know what we have to do and we know how to make that work. But actually, it was through conversations, but also through the Honeycomb report that they put out of some of the findings from those stadia, where the recycling levels look low, but as you dig a little bit deeper, you realize actually it's more difficult for stadiums and venues to recycle because there's no recycling program in their communities. So it's very dangerous. So again, that I think from a very European perspective is like, wild in some ways. And we hear about that in different parts of Europe, different parts of the world. But again, I think there's that point about reporting, which is a really important one. I think part of what we hear about people's concern about reporting is it's viewed in this way. And we want to make sure that when we report this, people understand the bigger picture of what we're working with and how that fits in. And we're at different stages. And I think, it's a really important point, and it's important to have that context. But just fascinating how in some ways we're so far ahead. And then in other ways, really some of the basic stuff that we should do as second nature now is still slightly behind, depending on where you're based.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and kind of going into the kind of progression of research, my research, you can look at, again, what an organization needs to do to reduce its carbon footprint. And a lot of that is heavy lifting, costly, or at least has that initial financial hesitancy constraint. And it's not really seen by fans, right? And so how do we show our fans, because it is a CSR initiative where, yes, we want to do good, but we also want to get something also out of it by kind of conveying that to our fans. I'm not saying that's unauthentic. It's just trying to leverage it as best as you can across the board. And recycling, composting is that. And we, to support what Honeycomb was doing, we've collected data from collegiate football programs here in North America. And what you're really seeing across the board is, this is just a preliminary analysis of the data that we have, but it's about 40% diversion rate. And again, we're guessing it's like Honeycomb concluded here in College Station, we're 100% restricted because of the capacity that we have for waste management. We do not have composting that's readily available or even cost effective. And so that becomes a big challenge. And so it's kind of catching those things up. And to use another example, when we were in Seattle, they had the Bullitt Foundation created a building, and it was the most sustainable building at the time in the world when it was opened. And even in Seattle, where it was very environmentally progressive, they were seeing that the infrastructure that the city had itself couldn't let the building reach its maximum potential because of the way that sewer systems were done, and gray water systems weren't at that area of the city at the time. And so there's a lot of aspects that come into that, especially when you're looking much larger scale at a mega sporting event. Here on campus for our American football games, we'll have about 102,000 people showing up, and that's a lot of trash, and a lot of waste, and a lot of tailgating and drinking and all those lovely things that go along with sport. And you see that on Earth Day, you'll see teams promoting, particularly here in North America, the recycling programs. We care about this, and that's leading in some work that we're trying to start up here in the lab of what do people even know about sustainability, right? So, are we talking down in some regards or watering down what we're doing because people might have a higher level of understanding of what goes into being environmentally sustainable, especially in a sport context? Or do we kind of, need to still talk about light bulbs and recycling, right? Close the loop.
Absolutely. And this, again, I think is the big, so we look at the whole climate crisis and being more environmentally sustainable, etc. I think this is just another example of the chicken and egg scenario we have, which is the same as waste, it's the same as transport, etc. And actually, I have a lot of conversations with sports organizations where they say, we want to commit to these big targets, but we're not 100% sure we can get there because of these restrictions in place, so we can do as much as we can in our operation. But our fan travel, we're relying, because of where we're based, it's very difficult to get people onto public transport because the infrastructure isn't there. So we're finding it really difficult to reduce those emissions, or we will do. And this is, I think, the big play for sport long term is sport organizations definitely want to be in a credible position to put this ask in, but sports organizations have so much reach and so much power. And actually, once we're further along in this and we have a more credibility broadly, I think we're still on that journey. It's putting those asks in at a state level, at a federal level, at a national level here, or at a county level, or within your department, to sort of say, we've gone as far as we can. Now the wider infrastructure that sits around our operations has to change. So transport has to change, waste management has to change. And sport, I think, can be a huge trigger for that. But, I don't know how you feel, but I feel as though we're in this vicious circle a little bit, because we need to get far enough along that we're credible to put that ask in without the response being, hang on, what are you doing? While you're asking us for systemic and societal change, how far have you got? So we have to be at a stage en masse that we're at that to put that ask in. But also, a lot of people are hesitant to keep ploughing on with that when they feel as though these issues are what they're going to face at a broad level once it falls outside their operations. So this, I think, is again just the cycle we're facing, and I wonder if that reflects in the conversations you have and the work that you do.
Yeah, so we just collected data from our season ticket holders for football this past summer, because our athletic department's starting to make some commitments, which, if anyone doesn't know about Texas or the United States, Texas is more of a conservative state, and our campus in particular, compared to our rival up in Austin, is University of Texas. They're much more progressive, and they have T-shirts that say "Keep Austin Weird," and we think that's weird here in College Station.
Like that.
But this is more of a that's great barbecue all over the state. But anyways, if you indulge in animal proteins, but here in College Station, the campus is more conservative. I wouldn't say it's 100% conservative, but it has more conservative tendencies, and in particular our donor base and whatnot. And so we surveyed them, and surprisingly, they were extremely receptive. But through using our conceptual models that we had, we found that if we had even Adidas is our apparel provider here for our athletic department, that if Adidas or even a company that is well known amongst our fan base were to come out and say, look, we're helping Texas A&M, provide 100% green energy, or provide sustainably sourced apparel, fans would be less receptive to that than if it actually came from the athletic department. And so you can tap into, and we've been saying this for a long time, and now we finally have kind of demonstrated that empirically with our data, that you can use a fan identification that a fan has with a team, with a coach, with a player, and bypass kind of some hesitancy that they might have in their everyday life. And so we're getting, we got responses of saying, like, how do we address climate change? And people down here will say, we're the belt of the Bible Belt here in the States, but or the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. But you would have people say, like, God will take care of everything. I was like, well, that's great, but we still need to do something. I'm a Catholic guy. I get that. We have dominion over the world. We got to take care of it. But you have others that say, finally, you're doing something, right? And so that's the really encouraging thing. Again, you can bypass that hesitancy in everyday life because the athletic department is telling us to do so. And so you can leverage that social identity you have with the team. The other positive thing that we found from this, and again, using this conservative, sample as a kind of a benchmark, is that we asked them too, like, would you support the athletic department less if we did this? Like, no, we won't. And so, like, this hesitancy that practitioners have had in the past of like, well, I don't know how my fans are going to react. It's like, yes, you still need to put sophistication behind your campaigns, but this data that we have here can start to show organizations like, hey, your fans aren't going to react as negatively as you think, or negatively, period. And in fact, we've found the opposite of that. Fans that were more loosely associated with the team will become stronger fans because of environmental initiatives like this. So you can actually attract more fans rather than actually losing fans.
Yeah, which is very important for sport to understand as well, because, we hear that a lot in terms of communications of we're about insert sport here, we don't want to, we shouldn't be talking to people about other things, but actually we know whatever sports clubs do, they're rarely going to lose fans unless it's really, really serious. But actually, as you said, they can gain fans, or they can cement the relationship with some of those other fans as well. So that's great. You've got the data to show that, which is incredible as well. Just to finish off, there's so many insights there and so many thoughts for people to mull over in terms of some of this work. But for you, in terms of the work that you're doing and the projects you're working on, and just from your perspective there, what's your hope for the future in the terms of sport and sustainability? If we look through to 2030 or beyond, where do you hope that we'll get to sort of in the next decade or so?
Well, this is my academic bias, and I'll always make this plug that there's stronger collaboration between practitioners and academics. We bring different expertise to the table. You keep us humble by saying that won't work practically, and then we say the data doesn't support that. So it's a wrestling match, a very friendly wrestling match. But there's ways that we can help each other and advance that. So I hope to see more of that, and that's not just to advance my work, but the work that a lot of other people are doing, because Matty Orr, Walker Ross, Tim Kellison, and the list goes on and on of members of, whether it's of the Sport Ecology group or beyond, that are doing phenomenal work that's out there. And we want to get that into the hands of practitioners, because that's ultimately the purpose of our jobs. Yeah. But where I would love to see the industry go is that we start having, reporting becomes a regular thing. And sophisticated levels of reporting. And we might need to start small, and that's okay. But efforts like you all have done through Sport Positive to kind of apply an incentive or a social pressure, whether you see it that way. I see it as a social pressure to get teams to be more active. Mm-hmm. Seeing that across more teams and leagues, that would be great. Yeah. But if seeing fans starting to demand that more, I would hope to see that. And that would result in the reporting. And because of that, you would have a trickle down, and getting more and more sophisticated as they go along, and getting into new spaces where offsets, yes, that's the quote unquote fail safe that would come at the end, but that we're charging ourselves enough on those offsets where it would incentivize us to really invest to be as sustainable as possible in all of our operations. And that would extend into other aspects of sustainability too, not just environmental, but social.
Amazing. What a place to be 10 years. We'll cross our fingers that we get there. But listen, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Brian, and thank you for taking the time. It's amazing to hear the insights and the work that's happening there. So that was Dr. Brian McCullough from Texas A&M University and co-director of Sport Ecology Group. Thanks for listening to the Climate of Sport podcast. Please like and subscribe, and get in touch if you want to share information about the work that you're doing, if you want to appear as a guest, or you want to recommend guests, or you just have ideas of conversations you'd like us to have. You can get in touch by emailing info@sportpositivesummit.com.